Hello, everyone, and welcome to my session. First of all, again, thanks to organizers of this amazing conference, and thank you for selecting me to be part of it. So, my topic for today is security in low-code, no-code development. I choose this topic because it's pretty, let's say, hot topic, and in future it will be definitely, let's say, pretty exciting to see what will be do inside this low-code, no-code development. So, just few words about me. I work as DevOps engineer at Endava. I'm also DevOps Institute ambassador. Also, one of DevOps Institute ambassadors from Bosnia and Herzegovina is also one of the speakers at this conference, Mustafa Toroman. He also was a DevOps Institute ambassador. And also, I'm community lead Bosnian Clouds. That's the pretty new community. So I'm start with building this amazing community currently on Bosnian language, with a lot of different topics about clouds. So you can follow me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. So let's jump inside topic. So first of all, let's clarify what is low-code, no-code development. Many of you are maybe already work with these types of development platforms or development environments. In most of case, it's visual software development environments where you have some kind of drop downs, or you just use drag and drop options there. So basically, you just pull some, I don't know, menus, search box, even login forms to some place on your screen normally. And then using this, let's say, drag and drop, you building your application. And for beginners, that's awesome. That's really awesome. Even if you never wrote a single line of code with these platforms, you can easily build many applications, and you can build even some more complex application than you think that you can. So this is pretty cool because with zero knowledge of any programming languages, you can build everything. Okay, not almost everything, but you can build some simple applications, even some websites, because some of low-code, no-code platforms offers you to develop entire website in just few clicks. For example, one good example is Wix.com. So with Wix.com, with zero knowledge, you can build entire website. Even WordPress in some cases can be a low-code, no-code platform, because you just install some plugin, some theme that you like, and you are ready to share some blog posts or have some kind of web page there. So let's just go through these platforms. We have few of them. For example, Appian, Microsoft PowerFX, as I mentioned, Wix, Oracle Application Express, and there's a bunch of them. I think these platforms are rising, especially in this COVID situation. And my next slide is really about that. I must say this COVID, because we hear this COVID word during these past 2 years very often. And I think the COVID give us lesson how to move quickly through the entire application lifecycle to entire development process. For example, teams start working remotely. We are developing application maybe much quicker than before, because we must develop them quicker than before. What's the main point about this low-code, no-code platforms during this Corona time is that you can really quick develop application. For example, you need some simple website for some client. Okay, no worries, just a few drag and drops and you have website. You need some login screen, no worries. Again, you have some options there. You can use pre-built login screens, pre-built login forms, and just drag and drop. You have everything in place. Everything's pretty fine and shiny, and it's ready. So you spend less time on development process instead of, I don't know, for example, if you need 2 months for some basic website with some, I don't know, login screen, some profile. Let's say you need approximately 2 months. With low code, no code, you can develop this in maybe 1 week. And that's the pretty cool, For management perspective, it's cool, you don't pay too much for developers, you have website for your client, you get money for that, and that's cool. And One point is that you don't need traditional developers. For example, if you need 5 developers to build some website in low code, no code, you maybe need 1 or 2. And for management, that's also cool because they have cutting costs and they have application on the end for client ready and everything is shiny. They get money and that's cool. For management, that's cool. But for IT people, that's not cool because uh, there's a lot of security issues with this kind of development, and we will talk about this later. So maybe next slide will show you why low code, no code is good for education. You are maybe see this screen many times. I mean, this program Scratch. In my country, usually kids start learning programming with this kind of tool, and this is, let's say, good point why low code, no code is good for some parts of IT. For example, if kids start off coding, for them it's pretty hard to understand all of these magic words. Kids don't know what mean for int e, or they don't understand, I don't know, functions, all that stuff. But this visual representation of code for kids is pretty cool. They see a lot of different colors, they can build something, they have some kind of animation, so they see what's happening there. So for them it's pretty interesting, but never they will never understand. Of course, in this stage they will never understand what's happening behind scenes, but they see that something's moving. So for them this is awesome opportunity to learn coding. uh, let's go to the future of the coding, because if you're talking about future of the coding, more applications will be developed using low code, no code platforms. That's the fact. So when we move into the future, definitely the traditional coding are going to die. And that's the sad. From one side, that's the true sadness, but otherwise you see that in future, if we, I don't know, develop a good low code, no code platforms, we will definitely have awesome products. We can develop products more efficiently, we can develop products quickly, but uh, at this point I think it's not these platforms are still unsecure. You will see later why. uh, in If we start using this kind of platforms, build time of any kind of application will be decreased. You don't need to spend 1 year to build some application, you will just need maybe 1 month. So by forecast, low-code, no-code tools will account more than 65% of all development activity by 2024. So that's the, I think, good prediction, because definitely in the future we will have this kind of platforms and more application will be developed using these platforms. Non-tech people will develop their application easier. There are many, let's say, students who are never tried to code something. There are a lot of people who have great ideas, but let's say realization of that idea is pretty expensive. They need to pay developers, they need to pay, I don't know, QAs to test that, and everything. They need to pay some kind of platforms to host that application. But with some kind of low code, no code platforms, they can prepare and they can, let's say, make their ideas real for, let's say, 10% of some price. So the low code, no code platforms are definitely worth of waiting. But that's the future, definitely. It's not still at the point. The future of coding is no coding at all. This is the ex-CEO of GitHub said. But also one pretty interesting story about something like this. Uh, the previous speaker, Yasmin Zemovic, was my professor at faculty. And a few years ago, he told exactly like this, even before this CEO of GitHub. He told us that the future of coding will be drag and drop. And that was, I think, a few years ago. So the predictions are real. So definitely this will be the point for future to be part of it. So what we have, if we talk about security in traditional environments, the story is more, let's say, traditional. if you ever work with some kind of development team or in development company that develops some kind of product, we already go through all of these. What's the good if we have, let's say, traditional approach to security? We have a control over entire application life cycle. What that mean? That means that we have control over the source code of that application. We have control over developers because we know that developers developing application in our environment, we give them some, I don't know, data inputs, and we know that database and all data are hosted inside, I don't know, some our environment. Is that maybe on-prem? Is that on the cloud? That's also depend from company to company. But in general, the entire, let's say, security of application is in our hands. So that means that code security is under our control. So as I mentioned, you see the code. You know that your code is hosted on some GitHub on-prem or in the cloud. That's also depend from company to company, but we know where is this code stored, and we are, let's say, securing these code repositories. Next step is infrastructure. Why is this important? This is important because if you use some low code, no code platforms, you never know where this server is. Is it on some cloud? Is it on some data center? And who have access to this infrastructure? Who have access to server where my application is running? These days, security is pretty hot topic. And if we host our application somewhere else, let's say the people who work inside these companies can easily go to that server login, find our code, go through the code, see data there. They can sell that data, and our application don't have any sense anymore to have that kind of application because someone else have data and someone else have access to that application, and that's really shame on us and shame on our business. Also, I would like to add here something more is during this traditional, let's say, software development, we also have this kind of pipelines that's also modern in this DevOps age. So basically, it's pretty important to have security over these pipelines. So it's not only security over the code, over the infrastructure. There's also security over the pipelines. If I write code inside my local machine and start this pipeline somewhere else, my code being published somewhere, go through network, go through this pipeline, and being published to some kind of servers. But also it's important to have, let's say, this kind of pipeline secured. So I know that my code is, let's say, 90% secure. You can never say that your code is 100% secure, but that's not true at all. Also, a good point is to have some security teams. I mean, this is in traditional environments. As my previous colleague said, Yasmin, he told that you can have red team, blue team, purple team. You can have security experts inside your company, so they can easily manage entire application. They can hack your application from inside, and then you can fix all of these bugs, vulnerabilities, and all that stuff even before your application is go inside the public, inside production environment. And that's, from security perspective, is pretty cool. You can easily have control over your application. You know what are weaknesses, what are the bugs, so you can fix them. But with low code, no code, the story is a bit different. And then let's jump inside the security in this kind of environments. In this kind of platforms, there's always a race between security, speed, and productivity. Why? Because normally they want to have customers, they want to have users that will use their application frequently. They want that some user, if I was subscribed to your platform, I want to be able to develop your application as quickly as possible. So if I'm if I'm, let's say, subscribed to your environment, to your platform, I want to build something, let's say, in 2 days. And that's always a race between security, productivity. If I subscribe it, how can fast I develop some application, but where's the security then? That's always gap between productivity and security, at least in this kind of environments. Currently, unfortunately, most of these, let's say, platforms are, let's say, black box environment. Why? We see only, let's say, front end. We see very nice GUI that's pretty cool. You have different options, drag and drop, different menus, but you don't know what's happened behind the walls. You see only the, let's say, some kind of shiny doors, but you don't know what's happened behind that. Maybe that's the one of the reasons why these low code, no code platforms are still, let's say, used only for some parts of business. For example, banking at this point will never use low code, no code platforms at all, because there are a lot of sensitive data there, and I think there is no bank in the world who will easily switch to some kind of low code, no code platform to develop some kind of applications. Someone else maintain our code. When I say maintain our code, I mean they maintain some kind of source code repository, someone else, and they have a real access to that code. Basically, what we have access is just this some drag and drop options. So basically, drag something on screen, drop it from screen, save it. That's all options that we have, at least at this point. There's different options. To be honest, there's different platforms that offer you currently. Some platforms even offer you to see some kind of code, but that's the just one part of application. They give you options to see. Okay, you can see just, I don't know, maybe 20% of your code, 80% of code are maintained by some XY platform. And what's the code is stored on different location. That's also one pretty, let's say, catchy point, because if you live in Europe and your code is stored in USA, that's the some issue with law. There's a different security standards that you must, let's say, to follow to achieve some kind of security inside your application. And this is, as I mentioned, black box, because you never know where this code is stored. Even if a platform told you, okay, your code is, I don't know, in Europe, you never know where this code is. It's just the trust between you and this platform. And as I mentioned, these kind of platforms are pretty good for some small projects, but definitely at this point of time for enterprise applications, there is no need to use these kind of applications, at least at this point of time. But for future, we will see. Let's go to deeper inside the security in this low code, no code environment. As I mentioned, there is lack of visibility. Code you can see, even if they offer you can see just one part of your code. But let's say if you have 10,000 lines of code, they will give you options to just modify, let's say, 500 lines of code, and that's it. There is no more code at all. Just a small piece of code, you can add it, you can change, and that's it. Security and security coding practice depends from low code, no code vendor. Because normally, if you're developing your application by your own, you write code, you have OWASP top 10, you have different coding standards that you can follow to be sure that your application is, let's say, secure. But if you part of some kind of low code, no code vendor, and definitely you don't see what's happening behind that. You don't know what is security practice inside this low code, no code environment. You don't know what are they doing with your code, where that code is stored, where your data is. You only see this front end, that's it. As I mentioned earlier, this is really difficult for enterprise to have control over application and data processing, because as I mentioned, it's pretty hard to catch all of these parts of this kind of environment. They offer you, they are very user friendly, but you don't know what's happened behind. And as I mentioned earlier, for banks, for, I don't know, some kind of providers or enterprise products that have a lot of data, that have a lot of sensitive data, user data, these kind of products are pretty, let's say, catchy. You can use them, but then you are entrapped to be hacked, to be exposed by someone else. So security audits cannot be done. This means if you have already inside your company some security teams, security or any kind of hack to your application is pretty hard to be done, because if you try to attack that kind of platform, you are attacking entire platform. You cannot attack only your application, because maybe you piece of code that you're using is maybe shared between 10,000 customers, and single bug inside this kind of software can be pretty bad for entire, like, for 10,000 customers. If someone hack you, probably he will hack 10,000 customers. So this is pretty a big issue with this kind of platform, because it's, as I mentioned, it's very lack of visibility. You don't know what's happening there. So let's go to insecure code. As I mentioned, it's pretty hard to believe that these platforms are, let's say, developed by security standards. You never know what's happened behind walls. So since the code is not stored under user control, you don't have control over your code, and this makes issue. You never know who have access to your code, and single bug can affect entire platform. One bug or security problem can be, let's say, deadliest to 10,000 customers or more. So if you're using this kind of platforms, you must be aware of these issues and be, let's say, smart to choose which of these platforms you want to use. One point is access control. When you're using this kind of I don't know, did you ever use them, or if you plan to use them in the future, you will see that access control is pretty hard to implement. There's zero access control, and it's pretty hard to, let's say, control what users can do, what user cannot do. And then it's also hard to control who can access to code repository, who have access to server side, who can access physically to servers, who can literally store your application and install somewhere else, or who can sniff your data there and sell that data on some black market. And for in this kind of low code, no code environment, users have only visibility over what they need. So if platforms give you, I don't know, visibility over one part of your application, that's it. You can see anything behind that. So that's the one point that you also need to think about it if you are going to use this kind of platforms. No data oversight. This is pretty crucial question. Okay, if I use some kind of low-code, no-code platforms, I want to know where my data is. Because if I develop my application in a traditional way, I know my data is stored inside my company. I follow security standards. I follow, I don't know, standards for storing data in some kind of database. I use hashes. I use strong passwords. I use access control policies. I use a bunch of different security standards to make my application as secure as possible. But in these environments, it's pretty hard to, let's say, secure all of this, because you never know where this data is stored. You cannot know is some security standards are applied to my data. For example, is it maybe GDPR or some other security standards applied to my data? Because I don't see data. I cannot see database. I don't know what type of database they use. Maybe there's some lack with some version of database, so my data can be leaked very easily. So next part is data security, and who can access to my data. That's not. This is true in general, that some platforms offer you to have for free accounts. We will give you account for free, and then you don't know what's happened with your data. In generally, it's free for you, but you paying by your data. They use your data to sell on black market, to sell, I don't know, to some advertising companies. So based on that, your data, some companies have big profit, and that's the issues. So business logic flaws. If normally, if you use traditional methods of developing application, business logic should be baked inside the software. If I'm making some software, I want my logic be inside my code. not inside some kind of platform. This kind of platforms always have possibility for sensitive data to be exposed, and that's the truth. Unfortunately, that's the truth that some of them selling you data, some data always exposed by somehow, and you never know why API endpoints are threat by some security standards or what. Usually, this kind of API endpoints are great threat surface for attacking your application. If some platforms share API endpoint with some XY vendor, they know how to call you application. They know how to communicate between these tools. So that can be pretty good surface for attacks. Normally, the vendors of these kinds of platforms should test these kind of issues, and that's, I think, some kind of normal. If I have some kind of platform that offer you to have low code, no code environment, I would like to have some kind of tests inside my environment so I can secure your application from end to end. But unfortunately, that's not true. At least at this point of time, it's not true. But for future, we will see. So, what to expect in the future? I'm asked this question a few of, let's say, leaders inside this low code, no code environment. So they are, let's say, some CTOs or CEOs of these kinds of platforms, and they already know about security issues that they have with their platforms. Some of security issues are already solved. Some of them will be solved in future, because as I mentioned earlier, definitely low code, no code platforms will be the future of coding. So the coding will be writing zero of code. So what they told me is that they will definitely work on transparency, so you can have more control over your application, over your development process. They will give you full access to your source code. As I mentioned earlier, currently you have, let's say, access maybe 10 to 50% of your code, and you can change it. Usually it's some simple steps. You can change some titles, some menu names, and all that stuff. But for future, they predicting that they will definitely have, and they will give access for source code over entire your application. So even if you are, let's say, professional developer, and normally you want to build something pretty quick, it's pretty cool to have some options, drag and drop, entire application, entire logic flows. You build everything, let's say, by your mouse, by some GUI. And then if you need to edit something, you want to change some kind of logic, let's say you want to include some kind of algorithms there, there will be not problem. Okay, go to the code, change it, and then your application is ready to use. So also data protection security, this is also a good point for them. I mean, they told me that they will definitely work more about data protection and data security. So in future, you will definitely have options to choose. For example, if you live in USA, you can choose, okay, I want to, my data is stored inside USA data center. If you live in Europe, no worries. You can store your data in Europe, and you can choose, I don't know, a bunch of different options of database, which version you want to use. Is that maybe Microsoft SQL, is MySQL, Postgre, whatever database you want to use, you can use it. Also, good point is ability to run DAST and SAST, dynamic application security testing and static application security testing. Currently, it's pretty hard to implement this kind of security testing, at least at this point of time. But they will offer this kind of, let's say, service inside these platforms. So you can easily run DAST or SAST, and you can be, let's say, maybe more satisfied with this part of security than you can be right now. So what they also will offer is that more control over the business logic. As I mentioned, currently it's pretty hard to implement some specific business logic using this kind of platforms, because they are like more or less, they are offering some basic stuff there. And if you need to do small complex things, it's pretty hard to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, they will give you access to application logic. I mean, code and logic. That's also can be part of this access to source code, but they will give you, let's say, more options to have under your needs. Then, should we use low code, no code platforms? This is generally maybe good question for all of us. So usually, if you are a beginner in coding, this is good point to start. There's a bunch of different platforms that offer you to build some kind of application, and for beginners this is awesome. Even for a child who starts learning coding and then he want to build something really quick, these kind of platforms are awesome. Even if you never write code and you have good idea, okay, why not to try? You can always try something like this. But there's a few questions that you need to ask yourself. Do I need this kind of platforms? Do I care about my data? If I don't care where my data is stored, or if I don't care who can access to my data, okay, no worries, I can use low code, no code platform at all. If my application is not complex at all, if it's some kind of simple website with few banners, with few, I don't know, posts, maybe some kind of login page, why not? Why do not use these kind of platforms? You can easily build entire platform in days to have pretty good, let's say, small business there. Why not? And next is achieving security best practices. Currently, with low code, no code platforms, it's pretty hard to achieve security best practices. Some platforms offer you, let's say, pretty good security options there. But on the end, it's not security that we want. You always want to be secure as much as possible. And currently, with these kinds of platforms, it's not possible. So you always need to think about, do I need this platform? Or maybe my application is so complex, so instead of using these kinds of platforms, I will easily develop it by myself. So in general, low code, no code platforms are great. So they are great for some parts of business, but in enterprise, there's a still gap between security and productivity. As I mentioned earlier, it's always raised between security, speed, and productivity. So if you need to develop something quickly, low code, no code is great. But if you want to have a secured application, at this point of time, unfortunately, low code, no code platforms are not good. So that's it from me. It's not 45 minutes, but yeah. I would like to thank you all, and I wish you will be healthy and safe at this crazy Corona time. And thank you for being part of my presentation.